Okay, colleagues, well done for making it to the final slot. We've got some 30 minutes or so to have a go at the question of should we do lectures? And if we don't do lectures, what should we capture? As a follow-up to the conversation that we were having on Twitter with some of you and some others outside, just to make a point as a matter of principle, if you like, which is I'm very much in favor of lecture capture. So if we are doing lectures, actually we should capture them. However, I would ask a couple of other questions in relation to this. One, should we use, overuse, abuse lectures in higher education? Do we? And secondly, does the need, requirements, or even policy to capture lectures encourage a culture of teacher-centeredness? In other words, approaches to teaching that encourage the delivery of information. So that's the second question we might want to ask ourselves. The third comment I wanted to make prior to jumping into what we're doing at Northampton has to do with the fact that from what I was able to gather throughout the day, today has been about lecture capture, but it has also been about the use of video in higher education. Now, my definition of lecture capture was a bit different from some of the things I've heard, which is interesting. Using video for other purposes, such as the provision of feedback, and so that is fine as well. And that is not within what I had in my definition of lecture capture, i.e. the capture of lectures. So, this is us. That's the University of Northampton in one slide. So you'll be pleased to hear that I won't bore you with the detail. I will just say that we have a strategic document called Transforming Lives, Inspiring Change. It's very brief. That infographic was designed and rendered by students. We have 3 areas of work in our strategy, one called Super Supportive, one called Future Focused, and the other one called Social Impact. If you're interested in reading that strategy, it's very, very short, as I said, and you can download that. It essentially conveys Northampton as a young university where changes can happen very, very quickly, and some of those changes will be illustrated in today's session. And on the next slide, you will have the pleasure of watching a very short video clip. You have a task to do with this. It's not a case of watch this, read that. Remember that. The task is, when was this video uploaded to YouTube? And how do you know? Okay? Warning, many of you will have seen this.
Yeah, it's good. Probably.
Okay. When was that put on YouTube? Close. It was uploaded in 2008. Well done. Yes. How did you know? Is that because you watched it at the time, or because?
Facebook was popularized around 2007.
And there's another big clue, which is? Yes. And the Google Docs interface looks so dated now, doesn't it? It's amazing. Okay. So we got that as a bit of context. And we got a bit of evidence base here in terms of what the research is telling us. I'm not going to read all of that. There's plenty of research that looks into lecture-based courses versus what's referred to as active learning courses. That's largely consistent within STEM and outside STEM. And closer to home, we've got Gray and Gibbs already in 1981 talking about this, and Diana Laurillard more recently in Rethinking University Teaching talking about the same things and saying pretty much similar things. But it's also interesting to ask students themselves and look at their publications. What have they said about these things in the various NUS reports? So they want more interactive classes, they want classes and courses that lead to good employability skills. They've conducted various literature reviews themselves, the students, which highlight things such as active learning, time on task, student-teacher contact, relevant learner activity, teacher quality, and quality interactions within and outside the classroom, among many other things. So it was in this context that at the University of Northampton we said, well, maybe given the profile of students that we get at Northampton, low entry profile, low number of UCAS points, we need to do something about this. We noticed that in large lecture theatres, having students with those profiles led to losing them. We needed to do a bit more hand-holding, a bit more personalized work with them. So we came up with a notion that is not new, but that is quite explicit about active blended learning. So one thing about this is explicitness. It's not necessarily innovation. And that's how we define it. That's exactly what we mean by active blended learning. And we mean that and nothing else. Active blended learning does not mean becoming an online university. On the contrary, we value face-to-face contact time as much as our students do. But the first point revolves around the scaffold, the building of the personalization environment using activities that develop all this knowledge and understanding and so forth. And that is a first hint to the fact that at Northampton, content is not king. What you do with it is. The second bit refers to the face-to-face activity linked to what happens outside the classroom, whether it's in the lab, in the field, during a placement, or online. And the third point is about the learner autonomy, the change-maker attributes, which is the subject of another conversation, and employability. So that's what we mean by it. But you notice that ABL has, obviously, the word blended learning in it. So here is your task. You thought this was a lecture. Well, it kind of is. But I'm going to ask you to think about this. And before you do, I'd like to suggest that if you're thinking, as many of the people I asked this question are, if you're thinking around that, think again. This is a very sad state of affairs. Blended learning is much more interesting than this. It's much more complex, much more multi-layered, much more difficult than this. Blended learning is not a simple continuum between those two. So I repeat the question, what are the other dimensions of blended learning? It says 2 minutes there. I'm going to give you just one because I'm running out of time. Can you find a neighbor and just pick out 1 or 2 other dimensions? Again, if your neighbor is unfriendly, look elsewhere. Okay, guys, thank you. Thank you. I would really love to go around the room and ask people what they think and what they discuss with a friendly neighbor. But instead, I'm going to be I'm going to do it in a flipped way. And someone is already telling me 10 minutes, because how terrible is that? I'm going to just give you my answer, shall I? And then you're going to tell me if that more or less maps onto what you discussed. That's my answer, and I'm sure you came up with something like that. The black axis, face-to-face to online, is there, but that's just one of many. There are many other dimensions that you can build into the blend. If you imagine a slider on each of those axes, you can reach different blends as you deliver different courses. And each time you do so, the blend will be different. You might not be able to read that very well from the back, so I created a nicer version of it. So there are many other dimensions you can add. And indeed, the amount of lecturing can be one of those. So that's how we conceptualize blended learning at Northampton. As a complex, evolving thing. Of course, if I showed you that, a few words would instantly spring to mind. Such as, oh, come on. No? Oh, yes, of course. Flipped, which is the new sexy term for something that has existed for a few thousand years. But and except that now that you've taken pictures of that, go on, that person with the iPad there, yes, thank you, good. Now delete it, because it actually doesn't work very well. It doesn't. It does need other things in it. And if we do that, and that alone, given the profile of students that we get in the context that I described earlier, we've got problems. We need something else. We need much more than this. The box in the far left, the exposure to content, that's actually the easy bit. There is a lot of content there, and we create more content all the time. What is not that easy is something that enables students to do something meaningful with it. That is the hard bit, and that is what makes a good teacher. In short, colleagues, the tasks for sense-making that we encourage our colleagues to design for in-class use and for online use, they play a key role in this scaffold that we want to build. So if you want to know what active blended learning is in a single slide, that's the one, in brief. Yes, it goes back to the beginning, and it shouldn't be quite as linear as the arrow suggests and all of this. But in essence, our effort over the past 5 years has been in that box, doing the personalization piece, the hand-holding bit, the bit that turns input into intake. That's our effort. So now I've told you over several slides what ABL is, and I'm going to ask you to tell me what ABL is not. Fill in the blanks. First blank, anyone? It makes use of non-interactive lectures, or number 2, the VLE or LMS is primarily a content dump or repository. Yes. 3, online activities merely an add-on, an additional thing. We don't want oil and water, we want a blend. This is actually quite important, that number 3, because many of my colleagues tick the box with, oh, I'm going to put a bit here or there online, and so I'm fine. My students do blended learning. Yeah? No, they don't. And finally, you need a negative there, so there is no evidence of systematic enhancement. That is my answer to it, which may or may not be yours. Now, this is all very good and difficult enough, but things can get even harder, because we are building a new campus. And active blended learning is not something we do in addition to what we do. It is our job. That is what a teaching university does. The new campus will open on the 1st of September of this year. Yes, it's chaos at Northampton at the moment. Complete chaos. Another day I'll tell you more about the new campus. But scaling this up requires an explicit, deliberate, and evidence-based approach. Explicit, transparent, very, very, very clear. Deliberate. This is the direction of travel. Evidence-based. You've got to put the evidence in front of people if they are to embrace change. Up to last month, we had 97% of all our modules having been designed for active blended learning, which doesn't mean that we're teaching them in that way, of course. Even if you have 12 people in front of you, you can still lecture at them, and you can capture it. We're working on that. This is another exciting piece. That is the campus. That's the center of Northampton. That's the river. I could tell you a lot about that. It is still almost ready, but it's a building site, so I can't invite you to go and look at it right now, but I can invite you to look at it from the 1st of September. Please do. There's student residences, there's a sports complex, all sorts of things. Even an engine shed down there, which is actually the Students' Union, the most interesting building of the whole new thing. The new campus at Waterside has all those features. I'm sure that some of you will have picked up on 2 of them. It has no lecture theatres, and it has no staff offices. Oh, what am I going to do with my books? I hear you cry. Yes, that's again a topic for another conversation. But there is plenty of evidence to suggest that having shelves and shelves of books in offices is not very good use of space. But even more so, walk around the campus during working hours on any day of the week, and you will find around about 70% of the offices empty. Again, it took time and bruises to get to the point where we are going to, where we said we would implement this. And we did reach a point at which you had to jump on the bus or get out of the way. And we reached that point after a few years, about 18 months ago. We are doing this. The Vice-Chancellor, by the way, hasn't had an office for 4 years. In case you wondered, oh, but the Vice-Chancellor surely has an office. He hasn't. Which takes us to the topic of today. Do room layouts, technologies, policies, requirements lead us towards the information delivery approach. And is that problematic? For us, it would be seriously problematic. We don't want that. We've moved away from that. We built a campus, £330 million of public money without lecture theatres, because we don't want people to be encouraged to do this. That said, we looked at the dimensions of the blend, and you could argue, well, actually, teacher-centered bits can play a role, and yes, they can. You could add an axis there for that purpose. Does that mean that we need something like that? I don't think so. But yes, teacher-centered components can play a role and do play a role. And finally, going on to the other bits that we discussed earlier, video for assessment, video for feedback provision, video for preparation of snippets in advance and so forth. Yes, of course, provided that you build a scaffold with it, as my earlier slide suggested. So it's not a case of read that, watch the other. It's a case of do something with it. Many challenges. I just wanted to say a couple of words about the two highlighted in yellow. The pedagogic ones, the views on teaching, and the notion that I can only repeat to my learners what some other teachers did to me when I was a student. To illustrate the point, a quick anecdote. A few weeks ago, I was having a coffee with someone who is notoriously resistant to these things. And we were sitting down, he looked at me in the eye and said, "You don't understand." What is it that I don't understand? That the complexity of my subject requires me to, and he slowed right down, to do lectures. So, I ask you, what does this person teach? Have a guess. Family law. I rest my case. On the other yellow thing, the digital fluence thing, all I wanted to show is the shift from non-literacy to literacy, to competence to fluency. Maps, no idea, even with a map. I can make sense with a map. I no longer need a map, and I bring my own stuff. If we focus on those three, roughly, the other challenge we had is where are we on all of this? Well, on the literacy side of it, with support I can do stuff. Here I'm autonomous, and here I can generate transformation and growth. So even better summarized, my knowledge and understanding of the tools, my practice, and the practices of others. In this respect, we are not using projectors anymore on the new campus. We are using that, which is a wireless system. There's no fixed computers. There's nothing. You just simply connect to a wireless in the room, which is connected by default. You have multiple screens, and you can give or take away control of those screens to anyone who's using them, students, staff, or a combination of them. I was hoping to give you a bit of a background on how we made change happen, how we scaled it up. Now, evidence support and agency is the model that we use. Agency meaning power, support, all the support structures that you would expect in a university for staff and for students, and evidence is the research both from the sector and from the university itself. To summarize this, there you've got the evidence, the support, and the agency in the first two, going clockwise. The model, research to practice to impact to policy. If you do the policy first and then try and implement lecture capture because you have a policy, you've got a problem. So we go that way round. We have the evidence base before, and then we translate that into policy. This is a summary of where we're at the moment. Going left to right clockwise, you've got the little model again. The next one is the personalization one that I've been going on about all afternoon, which is the hand-holding, the teaching in small groups. The next one is the CPD for staff and its alignment to the professional standards framework. The next one is the staff and student voice. The one after that is parity between teaching and research. And the final one is the framework of graduate attributes, about which I've said nothing today, but that will be the subject of another conversation. To conclude, colleagues, we've got a few principles. I've got a few principles to share with you. What matters is not the content, but what students do with it to achieve outcomes. Content is not king, context is. The second principle is what matters is not the technology, really. Does it matter if we use Moodle, Blackboard, Desire to Learn or Canvas? Well, it has a lot to do with it, but ultimately, I can make it work. And if you can say yes to that, then great. The technology is transparent, it's embedded, it's normalized. What matters in our case, this is important because of the new campus, which has got a smaller footprint than the older ones. What matters is not the space, but how we use it to achieve outcomes. And probably the most interesting and most important question is the one about what sort of research questions do we want to ask around this. So if the question is, does lecture capture work? When I think, and this is my own view, we're asking the wrong question. How can we use lecture capture to make good things happen is probably a better question to ask. At Northampton, we do have a system called Cultura, which enables us to do many things. Record 5-minute snippets of content, put the scaffold around it for students to do stuff with it, do lecture capture if we wanted to. It does the same as all the other tools. The question is not whether Cultura works for us. The question is how we can use it to make it work for our students. And that is the key thing for us. And with that, we finish. I think I am almost on time. Questions, colleagues? Are you circulating the mic? There's a question right here, and then there's one at the back.
Paul Holland from Swansea. I'm trying to think of the right way to frame the question, but so one of the drivers might be to go to active blended learning because of more sort of diverse student body and maybe students are generally less academically minded than maybe were 20, 30 years ago. But if that wasn't the case and you suddenly was offered students from academically minded students or more of them, would you go back?
If I would go back if the profile of students changed? Okay. Short answer, no, I wouldn't. And I can give you a good set of reasons for that. But the short answer is no. I wouldn't go back. I think this, if you replace the term ABL with good teaching, that's the reason why. There's a question at the back.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for the very interesting approach you are taking at Northampton. I wanted to ask about the capacity of the teaching rooms and any issues around efficiency. I'm convinced pedagogically this is a very interesting approach, but what is the capacity of your teaching rooms and how is that efficient in teaching first-year students that are handles that you're taking?
Capacity, average size of the new rooms at the Waterside campus is 40. 440. Some rooms are slightly bigger. For example, rooms that we use for team-based learning, which is not learning in teams. It is a structured approach to. And they are bigger. They can accommodate up to 60 flat floor. Many rooms are 25, 30. The second part of your question is this business of scale and whether we can actually afford to do this when you have cohorts of large numbers of students. Multiple teaching is not the cheap way forward, but equally expensive is losing students after about 3 months because a lecture or other arrangements in the university are not really suited to them. So we are taking a bit of a gamble, yes. We are taking risks. We are paying staff to teach more times. Yes, all of that is true. But we are hoping that the experience that these guys get is a little bit more personalized than the video that I showed you at the beginning would suggest. Any final questions? There's 2 here.
You've had the advantage of a relatively clean slate. Would your approach be the same or different for...
Can you ask again, please?
You've got the advantage of a relatively clean slate with this approach, new campus and being able to redevelop all the courses. If it was a more traditional university with existing campus, existing setup, would the approach be the same or different?
Well, bear in mind that we started this 5 years ago. At that point, I didn't know that the new campus was on the horizon. So for all intents and purposes, for my practice, we had 2 campuses in Northampton, and we wanted this to happen regardless. What the new campus has given us is a deadline, because suddenly the governors said, oh, we have to have this done before the move, which is okay. I understand why they're saying that. But this was happening anyway. So if you were to ask me, would you do that in a more established campus-based institution? I would give it a go, most definitely. Would I succeed? I don't know. I have done keynotes of this kind where this question has arisen in very traditional universities, and there were a few jaws dropping when some of the information I gave to you earlier was released, particularly the bit about no lecture theatres and no staff offices. I think the latter more than the former. But yes, would I try it? Yes, of course. The change mechanisms, the managing of that change process would be different. I had certain advantages here that maybe others wouldn't. But then again, this is a unique opportunity. How often do we have in our careers the chance to shape what a new campus looks like from scratch on the basis of a pedagogic approach? Certainly it was a first for me. And finally,
what was your training approach for your lecturers, so your teachers now?
Mm-hmm. Our training approach, in essence, we don't do training. We do staff development. So we have an accredited staff development scheme with the HEA, now Advanced HE, aligned to the UK PSF. They have to select a pathway within it. It's not PG Cert based, I hasten to add. It is needs driven, and when they are ready, they submit for fellowship at the right level. If they don't want to do that, they can still benefit from that staff development insofar as their needs dictate what they need to learn more about. That was the approach. That continues to be the approach. That has worked very well. As you are familiar with, probably in your own institutions, the hard to reach continue to be the hard to reach. And the ones who need it the least are the ones who go first to these sessions. Go back to my conversation with that family law colleague, and that will illustrate what the problem is. We have tried to embed ourselves, me and the rest of my colleagues, and get ourselves invited into learning and teaching groups at faculty level, at subject level, at module level. And that way, getting under the skin of those, we have managed to get closer to the hard to reach. So that more or less gives you an idea. Bear in mind, Northampton is a very flat structure. Very, very flat. No PVCs, no DVC, nothing like that. So I am very, very close to the guy up the top. I'm very, very close to all lecturers. I can benefit from that, and so can they. I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.